How the U.S. conflict started. The truth behind the global crisis. Before we begin, remember this. Some conflicts don't start with bombs or missiles. They start with secrets, mistakes, and decisions made behind closed doors. If you want the truth behind stories like this, make sure you're subscribed because the deeper you go into history, the darker it gets. The night was cold and silent over the Persian Gulf. On January 3, 2020, the calm skies above Baghdad International Airport suddenly exploded with fire. A U.S. drone strike had just hit a convoy leaving the airport road. Flames lit up the dark highway as twisted metal scattered across the pavement. Within seconds, the vehicles were nothing but burning wreckage. Local security forces rushed to the scene. Smoke filled the air, and the smell of fuel and scorched metal lingered across the empty road. Inside the destroyed convoy were several high-profile figures. But one name would soon shake the entire world. Major General Qassem Soleimani. To many in the Middle East, he was a powerful military commander. To the United States, he was considered one of the most dangerous figures in Iran's military leadership. And in that single moment, the strike that killed him would ignite one of the most dangerous global tensions in modern history. But the real story didn't begin on that highway in Baghdad. It started months earlier. Inside intelligence offices in Washington, D.C., analysts had been tracking unusual movements across the region. Reports from Iraq showed increasing attacks on U.S. bases. Rockets were landing near American compounds, sometimes missing by only meters. At first, the incident seemed scattered. Small militia groups. Local conflicts. Nothing unusual for the region. But investigators started noticing a pattern. Every attack seemed coordinated. Weapons used by the militias matched advanced equipment tied to Iranian-backed groups. Surveillance reports suggested that key operatives connected to Iran's Revolutionary Guard were quietly moving between Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And one name appeared repeatedly in intelligence briefings. Qassem Soleimani. For years, Soleimani had built a powerful network across the Middle East. Through alliances with regional militias, he helped influence conflicts in Syria, Iraq, and beyond. Many Western intelligence officials believed he was the architect behind numerous operations targeting U.S. interests. But proving it was another story. The evidence was scattered across intercepted communications, anonymous sources, and incomplete surveillance footage. Then something happened that changed everything. December 27, 2019. A sudden rocket attack struck a military base in Kirkuk, Iraq. The base housed both Iraqi forces and American personnel. One American contractor was killed and several soldiers were wounded. The attack sent shockwaves through Washington. Inside the Pentagon, the atmosphere turned tense overnight. Military leaders demanded answers. Intelligence agencies scrambled to trace the origin of the attack. Who fired the rockets? And more importantly, who ordered it? Investigators followed the trail to an Iraqi militia group known as Kataib Hezbollah, an organization long suspected of ties to Iran. Within days, the United States launched retaliatory airstrikes against militia bases in Iraq and Syria. But the retaliation sparked something no one fully expected. Anger exploded across the region. Crowds gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Protesters pushed through security barriers, setting fires and chanting against American forces. Images of smoke rising from the embassy compound spread across global news networks within hours. Inside Washington, officials believed something bigger was unfolding. Intercepted messages suggested that powerful figures inside Iran were coordinating responses behind the scenes. Once again, the same name kept appearing in intelligence reports. Soleimani. Analysts began to piece together a chilling theory. The escalating attacks might not be random at all. They might be part of a much larger strategy. A strategy designed to force the United States out of the region entirely. And if that theory was true, the situation was far more dangerous than anyone realized. Because removing Soleimani from the equation wouldn't just stop a network. It could ignite a global crisis. The decision that followed would be one of the most controversial military actions in modern history. But when investigators later reviewed the intelligence files connected to the strike, they discovered something unexpected. Hidden within the intercepted communications was a message that suggested Soleimani might not have been acting alone. Someone else had been coordinating with him. Someone whose name had never appeared in public reports. And when analysts finally traced the origin of that message, it led to a location no one inside the investigation expected. A secure government office. Inside Iraq itself. The discovery sent a wave of tension through the intelligence offices reviewing the case. A secure government office in Iraq. At first, the analysts thought it had to be a mistake. Intercepted communications could sometimes bounce across networks, making the source appear somewhere it wasn't. But after double-checking the signal routes and metadata attached to the message, the conclusion became impossible to ignore. The message had originated from inside a high-level Iraqi government building. Someone with access to power, someone trusted, had been communicating with one of the most controversial military figures in the Middle East. And suddenly the investigation wasn't just about foreign conflict anymore. It was about betrayal. Inside Washington, intelligence officials quietly opened a deeper inquiry. The intercepted communication wasn't long, only a few lines, but its timing raised serious questions. It had been sent only hours before Soleimani's convoy landed in Baghdad. That meant whoever sent it knew about the visit. And possibly, the mission. The message itself was cryptic. Arrival confirmed. The meeting will proceed as planned. There was no signature. No name. Just a digital fingerprint that traced back to a secured network terminal inside a government complex in Baghdad. Investigators began reviewing access logs, searching for anyone who had used the terminal during that time frame. But something strange appeared in the system records. The login credentials had been erased. Not just deleted, professionally wiped. Someone had attempted to cover their tracks. Meanwhile, outside the investigation rooms, the world was already reacting to the drone strike. News networks across the United States, Europe, and the Middle East flooded their broadcasts with breaking reports. Governments issued statements. Military forces across the region raised their alert levels overnight. Iran's leadership promised retaliation. American bases in Iraq and surrounding countries immediately strengthened their defenses. The tension in the region was reaching a boiling point. But inside intelligence circles, another question kept growing louder. Why had Soleimani traveled to Baghdad that night? Official reports initially suggested he was arriving for diplomatic talks. Some Iraqi leaders claimed the meeting was connected to regional de-escalation efforts. But investigators reviewing classified files weren't convinced. Soleimani rarely traveled without purpose. And rarely without protection. Yet that night, his convoy had moved quietly through Baghdad with minimal security. Almost as if someone believed the route was safe. Or guaranteed. The investigation team dug deeper into the call records and travel data surrounding the trip. One detail stood out immediately. Just hours before Soleimani's plane landed, an Iraqi political figure had held a private meeting inside the same government complex linked to the mysterious message. The meeting had not been publicly scheduled. No official agenda. No press coverage. Just a closed-door gathering attended by a small group of advisors. One of them, according to internal security logs, had briefly accessed the exact computer terminal that later transmitted the message. But by the time investigators requested the surveillance footage from the building, it was already gone. Deleted. Security staff claimed it had been part of routine data clearing. But analysts reviewing the timeline noticed something troubling. The footage had been erased only 2 hours after the drone strike. Someone inside the system had moved fast. Very fast. Meanwhile, tensions on the ground continued to escalate. Just 5 days after the strike, Iran launched ballistic missiles toward U.S. military bases in Iraq. Air raid sirens echoed through the desert night as soldiers rushed into bunkers. The missiles caused injuries but no immediate fatalities, yet the message was clear. The region was standing on the edge of something far larger. Global leaders began quietly discussing the same terrifying possibility. A wider war. Back in Washington, intelligence officers reviewing the Baghdad communication continued chasing the mysterious contact who had coordinated with Soleimani. Piece by piece they rebuilt fragments of the erased system logs. And then they uncovered something that made the entire situation even more disturbing. The terminal used to send the message had been accessed using a temporary security clearance. A clearance issued only hours before Soleimani arrived. And approved by someone at the very top of Iraq's government structure. But when investigators finally traced the authorization code used to grant that access, the digital signature attached to it didn't belong to an Iraqi official at all. It belonged to a foreign intelligence network. One that had quietly been operating inside Iraq for years. And if the evidence was correct, it meant the night of the drone strike might not have been just a military operation. It might have been part of a much larger and far more dangerous game. One involving multiple countries, secret alliances, and a betrayal that was still hidden in the shadows. And the person behind it all had just made their first mistake. By the time intelligence teams finished reconstructing the erased digital trail, the situation had become far more complicated than anyone inside the investigation had imagined. The authorization code used to access the Baghdad terminal did not belong to any Iraqi official. It came from a foreign intelligence network. At first, analysts believed it could be Iran. After all, Soleimani was one of the most powerful figures in Iran's military leadership, and he commanded the Quds Force, an elite branch of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps responsible for operations outside the country. But the deeper investigators went into the system logs, the stranger the data became. The digital signature attached to the authorization code wasn't Iranian. It was Western. Specifically, it matched encryption protocols used by allied intelligence agencies operating in the region. That discovery froze the investigation room. If the data was accurate, it meant someone inside a Western intelligence network had been operating inside Iraqi government systems, and had approved the temporary access used to coordinate the message sent to Soleimani. For a moment, the room fell silent. Because if that were true, the implications were enormous. It meant the chain of events that led to the drone strike might not have been as simple as a military decision targeting a hostile commander. It suggested something far more complex, and far more dangerous. The investigators rebuilt the timeline again, step by step. December 27, 2019, the rocket attack on the military base in Kirkuk that killed an American contractor. December 29, U.S. airstrikes on militia targets in Iraq and Syria. December 31, protests erupt outside the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. And finally, January 3, 2020, the drone strike that killed Soleimani moments after he left Baghdad airport. Each event escalated tensions further. Each step pushed the region closer to confrontation. But one question remained unanswered. Why had Soleimani traveled to Baghdad that night with such confidence? Declassified statements released months later revealed an important detail. Soleimani had been invited. Iraqi officials later claimed the visit was connected to diplomatic discussions meant to reduce tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. According to reports from Iraqi Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi, Soleimani was carrying a message related to possible negotiations. If that was true, it meant the commander had arrived expecting talks, not an ambush. Back inside the investigation files, analysts studied the intercepted message again. Arrival confirmed. The meeting will proceed as planned. But the real mystery wasn't the message itself. It was who had arranged the meeting. Because the temporary access used to send that message had been approved by the foreign intelligence signature. A signature that investigators eventually traced back to a classified joint operations network used by multiple Western intelligence agencies. And that discovery suggested something deeply unsettling. It meant the intelligence that led to the strike might have been part of a much larger surveillance operation already in motion. One designed to monitor Soleimani's movements across the region. But operations like that carry enormous risks. Because the moment surveillance turns into action, everything changes. The drone strike instantly altered the balance of power across the Middle East. Iran responded with missile attacks on U.S. bases. Global leaders feared the beginning of a much wider conflict. Military forces across the region prepared for escalation. But the hidden investigation into the Baghdad message revealed something else. The communication that led Soleimani's convoy onto that airport road had not been sent by him. It had been sent to him. Someone had confirmed the meeting location. Someone had guaranteed that the route was safe. And when analysts reconstructed the final network path of that message, they discovered it had passed through multiple encrypted relays before reaching Soleimani's security team. A technique often used in intelligence operations to hide the original sender. Which meant one thing. The person who arranged the meeting had carefully covered their tracks. To this day, investigators still debate the exact sequence of decisions that led to the strike. Some believe the operation prevented future attacks. Others believe it pushed the region dangerously close to open war. But one fact remains undeniable. That single night in Baghdad changed the direction of global politics. And the full story of who coordinated every step behind the scenes may never be completely revealed. Because in the world of intelligence and power, the most important players are often the ones whose names never appear in the reports. And if you think this story was intense, there are far darker operations hidden inside the history of global conflicts. Make sure you subscribe because the next one might reveal secrets that were never meant to be uncovered.